My name is Robert Miller. I'm 68 years old, and I never imagined my own son would one day treat me like a tenant in his house. After my wife passed away 2 years ago, I sold our small home and moved in with my son Michael and his wife, Anna. It seemed like the right thing to do. Michael said, "Dad, you'll never be alone again." I believed him. For the first few months, everything was fine. I helped around the house, cooked dinner sometimes, and watched their kids while they worked. But then, things began to change. Michael started coming home tired, irritated. One evening, as we sat at the table, he said sharply, "Dad, you live in my house for free. Don't you think that's unfair?" I froze. His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at Anna. She didn't meet my eyes. Then he continued, "Half of your pension will cover the rent. It's only fair." Anna nodded silently. I felt something twist inside me. After all these years of raising him, paying for his education, supporting him through every hardship, he now wanted rent. I smiled, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to let him see the storm inside me. "All right," I said calmly, "we'll talk about it later." That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My pension wasn't much. Half of it would barely leave me enough for my medicine and personal needs. But more than money, it was the disrespect that hurt. He didn't see me as his father anymore, just an old man occupying space. As I stared into the dark, I thought about something my late wife once told me. If people forget what you've done for them, remind them without saying a word. The next morning, I got up early, made breakfast for everyone, and acted as if nothing happened. But in my mind, something had shifted. I had a plan. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Quiet, patient justice. And it began the moment I stood up from that table last night.
The next morning, I woke up before everyone else. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sky orange, and I sat quietly at the kitchen table with my cup of coffee. My mind was clear now. The words Michael had said kept echoing in my head. "You live in my house for free." That sentence burned deeper than he could ever imagine. For years I had worked in construction, saved every penny, and raised him to be respectful, hard-working, and kind. Now he'd looked at me as if I were some burden? But instead of anger, I felt something else: determination. If he wanted me to pay rent, fine, but he would soon learn what it really meant to own a house. I started observing everything in the house. Who paid what? Who did what? Michael and Anna both left early for work, and I stayed home with the kids. I made breakfast, packed their lunches, helped them with homework, fixed broken things around the house, took out the trash, cleaned the yard, even repaired the leaky faucet that had been dripping for weeks. Everything I did silently, without complaint. After a few days, I wrote down every task, every errand, and every repair on a piece of paper. Then I calculated what it would cost to hire people to do all those things: cleaning, childcare, cooking, maintenance. The total came to almost 3 times the rent Michael wanted from me. I folded that paper and put it in my pocket. A week later, Michael brought up the topic again. "Dad, did you think about what I said?" he asked, pretending to sound gentle. "About the rent?" I smiled, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Yes, I have. I'll start paying from next month." His face lit up with satisfaction. He thought he had won. Anna smiled slightly, probably relieved there wouldn't be tension anymore. But what they didn't know was that my plan had already begun. That weekend, I visited my old friend Frank, who used to be my business partner years ago. He ran a small property renovation company now, and when I told him about my situation, he just shook his head. "George," he said, "you helped me when I had nothing. Don't worry, I've got a little project you might be interested in." It turned out Frank was renovating a small old house in town, and he needed someone trustworthy to stay there temporarily and look after the workers while they finished. "You can stay there rent-free," he said. "I'll even pay you a little for keeping an eye on things." I accepted immediately. That night I came home and acted as usual. I didn't tell Michael or Anna a word. Over dinner, they discussed bills and expenses while I quietly ate my soup. Then Michael said, "Dad, I've arranged a transfer from your pension to my account, so we won't forget." That was it, the final push. I smiled politely and replied, "That's very thoughtful, son. Thank you." The next morning, before they woke, I packed my bags. I left a letter on the table with the note I'd written earlier listing all the work I'd done for them, every meal, every repair, every hour spent with their children, along with the calculated cost. At the bottom I wrote, "If you ever wonder what I owed you, this is the balance. Consider it paid in full. Love, Dad." Then I quietly walked out, locked the door behind me, and never looked back. When Michael came home that evening, I imagine he must have been confused. My room was empty. The kids probably asked where Grandpa went. He must have read the letter, realizing too late that he had lost more than rent money. He had lost respect, love, and trust. That night he called me several times. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. Now I live in the small house Frank gave me to look after. It's quiet, peaceful, and I can finally breathe again. The neighbors are kind, the garden reminds me of my late wife, and for the first time in years, I feel free. I still miss my son and the grandchildren, but sometimes distance is the only way people learn. Maybe one day he'll understand what it means to be a father. Not just to demand, but to give. Until then, my plan continues, to live my remaining years with dignity and peace without waiting for anyone's permission to do so.
3 weeks passed after I left Michael's house, and I didn't receive a single call that wasn't just a missed attempt. I hadn't answered any of them. I wasn't ready. My days had found a new rhythm, simple, quiet, peaceful. I woke early, tended to the garden, made coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sunrise. The silence that once frightened me now felt like freedom. Frank's renovation project was coming along well, and he often stopped by with his crew to check progress. He treated me with respect, something I hadn't felt in months. Every evening, I'd take a slow walk down the small road leading to the lake. The air there was fresh, filled with the sound of birds and the smell of pine. Sometimes I'd think about Michael and the grandkids. I wondered if they missed me, or if they were angry. But each time the thought came, I reminded myself, I didn't leave out of anger. I left to regain my dignity. One Sunday afternoon, while I was trimming the bushes, a car pulled up in front of the house. My heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was. Michael stepped out slowly, holding something in his hands. A box. His face looked different, tired and guilty. "Dad?" he said softly. I stood there, silent. He looked around nervously, then handed me the box. "The kids made cookies. They wanted to see you, but Anna thought maybe I should come first." We sat on the porch without saying much. He kept his eyes on the ground. After a few minutes, he whispered, "I read your letter a dozen times. You were right. I treated you unfairly. I don't know what came over me, Dad. I thought about bills, the mortgage, the stress, and I took it out on you. I forgot everything you've done for me. I'm sorry." I didn't say anything for a while. I just watched the wind move through the trees. Then I said quietly, "Michael, when your mother died,
I promised her I'd always be there for you. I didn't expect to be treated like a burden in return. But I'm not angry anymore. I just needed peace." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "Can you forgive me?" I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't the hard part, son. The hard part is trust. That takes time to rebuild." We sat there for over an hour, talking about small things. The kids, work, the house. For the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the boy I once raised, not the man who demanded rent. Before he left, he said, "Dad, I want you to come home. The kids miss you." I shook my head gently. "Not yet. Maybe someday. But right now, this is where I need to be." That night, after he drove away, I sat at the table, opened the box of cookies, and smiled. They were unevenly shaped, covered in too much frosting, but they were made with love. Tears came to my eyes, not of sadness, but of quiet gratitude. Maybe the plan had worked after all, not to punish him, but to make him remember. A few days later, Anna called. Her voice was hesitant but kind. "Mr. George," she said, "I just wanted to thank you for everything you did for us. I never realized how much you helped until you were gone. The kids talk about you all the time. Michael's been different lately, more patient, calmer." I chuckled softly. "That's good to hear, Anna. Sometimes we all need to lose something to understand its value." Weeks turned into months. Frank's renovation was completed, and he offered to let me stay in the house permanently if I wanted. I agreed. I turned the small backyard into a vegetable garden, built a little wooden swing for the kids when they visited, and even adopted an old golden retriever from a local shelter. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and that was enough. One Saturday morning, I heard laughter outside. When I opened the door, I saw Michael's car again. This time, he wasn't alone. The kids ran up the path, shouting, "Grandpa!" and hugged my legs so tight I almost lost balance. Anna stood behind them, smiling warmly. "We brought breakfast," she said. "Pancakes, your favorite." As we all sat on the porch, eating and laughing, I realized something profound. My plan wasn't about leaving. It was about teaching. Sometimes love isn't shown by staying silent and accepting pain. Sometimes it's shown by walking away, so others can learn to appreciate your presence. And that day, surrounded by my family again, I knew the plan had finally reached its end.
The weeks after that family breakfast felt lighter than anything I had experienced in years. Michael and the kids began visiting every Sunday. At first, they came for short stays, an hour or two, but gradually, the visits stretched into full afternoons. The children loved helping me in the garden. They would plant tiny tomato seeds, water the flowers, and chase my dog, Max, around until they fell laughing on the grass. The house that once echoed only with silence now carried the sound of laughter again. One evening, after they had left, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the sunset. Frank joined me, carrying 2 mugs of beer. "You know, George," he said, "I've seen men your age fall apart after what you went through. But you built yourself back." I smiled faintly. "Maybe because I finally stopped trying to fix everyone else and started fixing myself." Frank nodded. "That's wisdom, my friend." A few days later, I was invited to speak at the local community center. Frank had told the people there about my story, how an old man who once felt unwanted rebuilt his life with grace and patience. At first, I didn't want to go. I wasn't a man of speeches. But then I thought,
maybe someone out there needs to hear this. So I went. Standing in front of that small crowd, my hands trembled slightly. But as I began to speak, the words came easily. I told them about losing my wife, moving in with my son, the hurt, the disappointment, and the decision to walk away, not out of pride, but self-respect. Sometimes, I said, the people closest to us forget who we are. It's not cruelty, it's blindness. And the only way to open their eyes is not with anger, but with silence and strength. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then an older woman in the back stood up and began clapping. Soon, everyone joined. I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. After the meeting, a young man came up to me. "Sir," he said, "I've been angry at my dad for a long time. Maybe I've been seeing things wrong. Thank you." I shook his hand, realizing my pain had somehow become someone else's healing. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't help but smile. Life has strange ways of turning heartbreak into purpose. The following weekend, Michael surprised me again. This time, he came with paint cans, brushes, and the kids. "Dad," he said, grinning, "we thought we'd help fix up your fence. It's the least we can do." I laughed. "You're brave to trust those kids with paint." Soon, the backyard turned into a mess of colors, laughter, and chaos. Even Anna joined in. Her face relaxed and open, nothing like the tense expression she used to wear back then. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Michael and I sat quietly while the kids ran around. He looked at me and said, "You know, Dad, I used to think being a man meant providing for your family, paying bills, working hard. But I see now it's more than that. It's about patience, humility, love. You showed me that." His words touched me deeply. I reached over and patted his shoulder. "It took both of us time to learn, son. That's what life does. It teaches, even when it hurts." Before they left that night, Michael handed me a small envelope. "I know you don't like gifts," he said, "but this isn't a gift. It's a promise." When I opened it later, I found a simple handwritten note. "You will never have to pay to belong again." I held that note for a long time, tears blurring my vision. That night, as the crickets sang outside, I whispered a silent prayer for my wife. "You'd be proud of him," I said softly. "He's finding his way." I felt a gentle breeze pass through the window, as if she heard me. I went to bed with peace in my heart, not because everything was perfect, but because life, finally, had come full circle. The son who once demanded half my pension was now offering me something far greater: respect, understanding, and love. And that, I thought, was worth more than any money could buy. Years passed quietly after that. Seasons came and went like pages in an old book, and I found comfort in the rhythm of my days. My hair had turned completely white, my steps slower, but my heart had never felt lighter. The small house that once stood empty now carried stories, memories of laughter, Sunday visits, painted fences, and children's voices echoing through the garden. Life, I realized, doesn't always give you second chances, but sometimes, if you wait long enough, it gives you peace instead. Michael had changed a lot. He visited almost every weekend now, not out of duty, but out of love. Sometimes he would bring his tools and fix something in the house just like I used to. Other times, he'd come alone just to sit and talk. We spoke about everything: his work, his kids, even his fears. He told me about the pressures of raising a family, the mistakes he'd made, and how he wished his mother could see how much he had learned. I smiled and said, She sees, son. She always has. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the garden, Michael looked thoughtful. "Dad," he said, "I want to tell you something. That day, when I asked for half your pension, I think about it all the time. It wasn't just about money. I was scared. I thought I was failing as a man, as a provider. I thought if I could control everything, maybe I'd feel safe. But I ended up hurting the one person who made me who I am." He paused, his eyes moist. "I can't undo it, but I can make sure my kids never treat me or anyone like that." I reached over and put my hand on his. "That's all I ever wanted, Michael. Not revenge, not regret, just for you to understand." That evening, Anna and the grandchildren joined us for dinner. The house was filled with warmth, the smell of roasted chicken, and the sound of laughter. After we ate, the kids brought out an old photo album. Inside were pictures from years ago, me and their mother, Michael as a baby, family picnics, birthdays. One photo showed me holding Michael on my shoulders, both of us laughing under a summer sky. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "You never stopped carrying me, did you?" I smiled and said, "A father never does, son. Even when he lets you walk on your own, he's still behind you, making sure you don't fall too far." Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight fall across the garden. I thought about how far we had come, from anger to forgiveness, from distance to closeness. The same house that once represented loneliness had become a home again. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling unusually tired. The air was still, and the sun hadn't yet risen. I made my coffee, but I didn't drink it. Instead, I sat quietly, looking out at the yard that had been my world for so many years. Max, my old dog, lay beside my chair, his head on my feet. I heard a knock on the door. It was Michael. "You're up early," he said, smiling. I nodded. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. We sat together in silence for a while, just watching the light slowly touch the garden. Then I said softly, "Michael, promise me something." He turned to me. "Anything, Dad." "Promise me you'll never let pride come before love, because once you lose love, pride means nothing." He nodded firmly. "I promise." That was enough. I felt peace in those words. I didn't know it then, but that would be one of our last mornings together like that. The kind of moment that stays frozen in time, not because it's loud or dramatic, but because it's quiet and full of truth.
The winter came slowly that year, wrapping the little town in white silence. The garden that once bloomed with colors now slept under a blanket of snow. I moved a bit slower these days, and even Max, my old dog, preferred lying near the fireplace instead of chasing the kids. But the house was still full of warmth. Every weekend, Michael and the family came to visit, bringing food, laughter, and life into the quiet walls. Sometimes I would sit by the window, just watching them laugh, and I'd think, how strange and beautiful it is that life can rebuild itself from the ashes of pain. One cold morning, I woke up coughing badly. Michael insisted on taking me to the doctor, though I told him it was nothing. The doctor smiled kindly, but his tone was serious. "Your heart is weak, Mr. George. You need to rest." I nodded. I wasn't afraid. I'd lived long enough to know that rest is just another kind of peace. That night, Michael stayed over. He cooked dinner, terribly, I must say, and nearly burned the soup, but I laughed so hard my eyes teared up. Mom used to say you couldn't even boil water, I teased. He laughed too. Guess she was right. After dinner, we sat quietly by the fire. The room glowed orange and snow fell softly outside. Michael looked at me for a long time and said, "Dad, I used to think you were unbreakable, but now I see strength isn't about never breaking. It's about standing up after you do." I smiled weakly. "And you, my son, finally learned that lesson." Days passed. My energy faded little by little. Sometimes I'd sit in my chair by the window for hours, watching the light change. The kids came running to show me their drawings, their report cards, their stories. Each time I'd smile and tell them, "You're doing great. Keep shining." They didn't know I was saying goodbye slowly, in small pieces. One afternoon, Michael came alone. He had that worried look again. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you ever think about, what comes next?" I chuckled softly. "Every day. But I don't fear it anymore, because everything I needed to see, I've already seen. I saw you become a good man. I saw my family whole again. That's enough." He blinked back tears. "You gave me more than I ever gave you." I reached for his hand. That's what fathers do. We give, not to be owed, but to see our children rise higher than we did. That evening, as he was leaving, I said, "Michael, remember the promise." He paused at the door. "Pride will never come before love," he said firmly. "I remember, Dad." He hugged me tight before walking away into the soft snow. Weeks went by, and my strength grew weaker, but my peace grew stronger. I spent most of my days writing small notes for the family, lessons, thoughts, bits of advice, slipped into envelopes and left in the drawers, the shelves, the books I loved. I wanted them to find those words one day when I was gone, like whispers of love scattered through the house. One evening, as the sun set in golden silence, I sat in my chair by the window, Max asleep at my feet. I looked at the garden, now frozen and still, and thought of my wife. "We did good, didn't we?" I whispered. In that moment I felt her presence again, gentle and warm, as if she was saying, "Yes, George, you did more than good." Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, everything was quiet. My last thought before drifting to sleep was simple: gratitude. For life, for love, for lessons, for the son who learned, and the peace that finally stayed.
The morning came quietly, with soft sunlight slipping through the curtains. Michael arrived early, as he always did on Sundays, carrying a basket of muffins the kids had baked. But this morning felt different the moment he stepped into the house. The fire was out, the air still. Max lifted his head but didn't move. Michael called, "Dad?" No answer. He walked toward the living room and saw his father sitting in his chair by the window, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. The morning light touched his face gently, almost like a blessing. Michael's heart sank. He rushed forward, kneeling beside him. There was no pain, no fear, just peace. His father had gone quietly, just the way he had lived, calm, graceful, dignified. For a long time, Michael couldn't move. The silence around him was heavy, but strangely warm. On the small table beside the chair, he noticed a folded letter with his name on it. With trembling hands, he opened it. It read, "My dear son, if you're reading this, I've gone to join your mother. Don't be sad. Life is not measured by how long we live, but by how deeply we love. You made me proud. You learned to be a man who gives more than he takes, who leads with love and not pride. Promise me you'll keep that alive for your children. Teach them what we both learned the hard way, that respect is not bought with money, but earned through kindness. And remember, I'm still with you, in every laugh, in every sunrise, in every quiet moment. With love, Dad. Tears fell on the paper as Michael held it against his chest. He whispered, "I promise, Dad." That day changed him forever. At the funeral, people from all over the town came. Neighbors, workers, even people from the community center who had once heard George speak. They all shared stories. How he helped fix a roof without asking for payment. How he sat for hours listening to a lonely old man. How he taught a child to plant his first tree. Michael realized that his father had quietly touched more lives than anyone he knew. After the service, Michael went home and gathered the family in the living room. He opened a small wooden box he had found in his father's drawer. Inside were dozens of small envelopes, each labeled with a name: Anna, the kids, even one for Frank. Each contained a personal note written in George's careful handwriting. The kids opened theirs first. Inside was a message: never forget to laugh, to forgive quickly, and to love fearlessly. The world needs your light. They smiled through tears. Anna's note read, "Thank you for caring for my son when he forgot how to care for himself." Michael found one more letter, addressed simply, "To my family." It said, "Don't mourn me too long. Instead, live the lessons. Make our home a place where love never has to be earned. I built a garden to remind you that things grow again, even after the coldest winter. So keep planting, keep hoping, keep loving." Over the next few months, the garden became sacred ground for the family. Michael and the kids planted new flowers every spring, just as his father had taught them. And every Sunday, they still came to the little house, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Sometimes Michael would sit in the same chair by the window, close his eyes, and feel that same calm presence beside him. He would whisper, "We're still learning, Dad. We're still growing." Years later, when Michael had gray hair, his daughter asked him, "Dad, what kind of man was Grandpa George?" He smiled softly. "He was the kind of man who didn't just live, he taught us how to live." Then he looked out the window at the garden, blooming once more after a long winter, and whispered quietly, "He's still here."
Years passed quietly after George's death, but his presence never left the little house by the garden. Michael had kept every letter, every memory, every piece of advice his father ever gave. The garden, once a small patch of flowers, had turned into something remarkable, a living monument. People from the town would stop by, not just to see the flowers, but to feel the peace that seemed to flow from the soil itself. Michael started calling it George's Garden, and slowly others began to do the same. One summer afternoon, as Michael watered the plants, a young man stopped by the gate. He looked nervous. "Sir," he said softly, "I heard this was your father's garden. I didn't know him, but when I was a kid, he once helped me fix my bike near the gas station. He told me not to give up, no matter how rusty life gets." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with quiet pride. "That sounds like him," he said. The young man placed a small stone by the garden's edge, carved with two words: "Keep going." From that day, the garden became more than a place. It became a movement. People began leaving stones with their own messages: forgive, be kind, listen more, love first. Within a year, there were hundreds of stones, each carrying a story connected to George in some way. A local journalist wrote about it, and soon George's Garden became a symbol of kindness in their town. Schools began organizing trips there to teach children about empathy and respect. Even the mayor came once, planting a tree in George's memory. He said, "We live in a world that rushes forward, but sometimes it takes one man's quiet wisdom to remind us to slow down and care again." Michael, now older and grayer, would sit near the garden bench every evening, watching families visit. Sometimes people would ask, "Did you ever forgive yourself for how you treated your father?" He would smile sadly and say, "I didn't have to. He forgave me before I even asked."
He often read his father's last letter aloud to those who came searching for peace. The words never lost their power. As years passed, Michael's own children grew up and had families. They carried the same lessons with them. His daughter Grace became a teacher and started a program called Letters from the Heart, where children wrote letters to their parents or grandparents expressing gratitude. His son Thomas became a community counselor, often quoting George's wisdom when helping people in need. "You don't need to be rich to change a life. You just need to care enough," he'd say. One winter, when Michael was 84, he sat by the same window where his father had passed. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the garden in white. He felt tired, but peaceful. The fire crackled gently, and Max's great-granddaughter lay sleeping by his feet. He looked out at the snow-covered garden and whispered, "Dad, you were right. Respect isn't earned through pride. It's grown through love." He closed his eyes, feeling that same calm presence beside him once again. And just like his father, he drifted away with a smile. When his children came the next morning, they found him in that chair, the morning light falling across his face, peaceful, timeless. Beside him was an envelope that read, "For my family." Inside it said, "Don't mourn me. Go to the garden. Keep it alive. Keep the love alive." And so they did. Years later, the garden stood larger than ever. It had a small stone arch that read, "The legacy of George and Michael. A garden grows forever." Every year, people from nearby towns came to plant something new: flowers, trees, even vegetables for the local food bank. The story of a father and son had become a legend, not because they were perfect, but because they had learned how to forgive and to love beyond ego. One bright afternoon, Grace, now old herself, sat on the garden bench with her granddaughter. The little girl asked, "Grandma, who built this garden?" Grace smiled, touching the child's hair gently. "Two stubborn men who loved each other more than they knew. One taught the world kindness, the other learned how to pass it on." The girl giggled and picked up a smooth stone that read, "Love never ends." She placed it under a rose bush and whispered, "This one's for them." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the garden glowed in gold and amber light, the flowers swaying gently in the evening breeze, as if whispering back, "We're still here. We're still growing."